arriving in U.S. mail from St. Louis in the original de Havilland DH-4 biplane in 10 bulky gunny sacks are the combined audiobook renditions and supplemental background information as presented in podcast form by moi, me, Robert P. Fitton. Good evening to one and all, wherever in the galaxy you make your home. Tonight we begin a series that began as an adventure time travel book involving nuclear bombs placed in U.S. cities in 1986. When I wrote that book, I sprinkled in a couple of plot twists involving JFK. By golly, in 1986, the former president has the top-rated radio show in the country. Having Kennedy alive in 1986 was a neat thought. So was going back in time. At the end, I said because Patch Kincaid went back in time, JFK was killed. I didn't elaborate, and that's how the book ended. But hark! I wrote a book on the Kennedy assassination and linked the two books together with sourced information, and I expanded the content. As our series, The Kennedy Paradox, opens, we find Patch Kincaid, test pilot, former astronaut in a secret defense program, and now involved in a time travel project, traveling through the Rocky Mountains, en route to meet his fiancée in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. But the intel wires are buzzing with possible reports of nuclear bombs placed in U.S. cities. Patch listens to the Kennedy program on the radio before his boss at Sector 13, Ray Meinkewitz, alerts him to the possible nuclear threat. And now, the beginning of The Kennedy Paradox by Robert P. Fitton. Interstate 80, Northern California, July 17, 1986, 3:30 p.m. Consider time travel a risky venture. In July of 1986, Patch Kincaid turned 30 and had twice traveled back in time. They first sent him to 1976. Retrograde's elastic effect of being snapped back to the present returned him safely to Sector 13 in 4 hours and had garnered him the distinction as being the first man to successfully survive a trip through time. Classified Sector Report 3517 stated that 11 men had died in previous attempts. The public would never know about those deaths, nor would they celebrate his triumph. Massive power outages resulted when the electric grid overloaded during retrograde. Patch just thought himself damn lucky to have survived, but like absorbing a mystical aphrodisiac, he stepped into the chamber again and ventured back to 1979. His orders were the same as the first trip. The threat of changing time, the paradox, yielded a specific set of instructions. Do nothing, touch nothing. Let the video capture a Midwestern cornfield 7 years back in time from the embarking chamber at Sector 13. No one had yet solved the question as to whether someone transported back in time could actually change history. For the first 10 years of his life, he and his family lived in Japan. His dad, Colonel Kincaid, worked on a variety of classified projects. As a boy, he dreamed about traveling back in time as he watched the jets taking off and landing with his dad at the naval base. At age 4, a baseball line drive rocketed into the stands, smacking him in the eye. Only the quick action of a serviceman retrieving ice from a nearby restaurant saved his vision. A cloth patch protected his eye for weeks. But for the rest of his life, Robert Garrison Kincaid Jr. carried a thin 2-inch scar under his right eye and the nickname Patch. Being around the aircraft at the naval base steered Patch toward becoming a pilot. The boys in school would tell stories about the spy plane that was housed on the base. He knew he wanted to fly high, fly fast, and even leave the Earth. Patch outlined stories about going back in time. But when the old Soviet Union brought down the spy plane in 1960, he learned its name, the U-2. In high school back in Kansas, he tried to stitch Einstein's theories in quantum mechanics into his imagined homemade time travel device. There had to be a way to go back in time like the time machine. As a man, he settled for flying high-speed aircraft and then secret missions into space, leaving the bounds of Earth might just be the closest experience to journeying back through time. The government conceived Project High Platform at the same time as the shuttle program in the early 1970s. Patch watched Al Devins and Rick Petrie roar into space on the first shuttle in 1978. He had to keep secret the project he had been a part of since 1977. The shuttle landed successfully at Edwards Dry Lake in Southern California, but Patch Kincaid drove north to a hidden military base called Catapult 35. Since the beginning of the space program, the military implemented a secondary program to gain a surreptitious military presence around the Earth and the Moon. He joined 26 other astronauts in being launched high above the Earth to construct the Military Readiness Platform, MRP. Patch worked closely with the facility that remained behind the dark side of the Moon. All of the space flights, traveling at almost 18,000 miles per hour, and the isolation on the MRP facilities could not prepare him for the perils of time travel. He initially rebuffed the assignment to the Sector 13 experiments. An intelligence agency physicist, Ray Meinkewitz, spoke with him for 5 hours in San Francisco. Meinkewitz constantly smoked a cigar, told Patch he did not have the guts to attempt time travel. Meinkewitz branded Patch as unpatriotic and selfish. He stressed that time travel might have military implications. Then he extolled Patch's bravery and expertise in space. He successfully signed Patch up for a project that would be burrowed away from the general public. Sector 13 demanded never-ending toil and high energy levels that neither rewarded achievement nor granted much free time. Patch worked on the high-powered accelerators, participated in constant testing, and even went around the country soliciting funds from prominent lobbyists and those in power. But in less than a month, he would leave the project and return to civilian life to test new commercial aircraft for Norcross Air. He cornered Meinkewitz after the trip back to 1979 and easily secured a few weeks away. He met with Norcross in Chicago and stopped to see his father's grave in Kansas, and then headed for Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. The cooler, fresh mountain air flared through the open window as Patch maneuvered his 5-speed Suburban up a long stretch above the Truckee River. Kate had finished her doctorate. In San Francisco, Patch would ask her to marry him. Over a month had passed since he had stared into her earthy green eyes and touched her long dark hair. In his mind, he replayed their making love back in her New York apartment and could almost feel her tight body. He smiled at the thought, turned on the radio, and scanned the dial for the Kennedy program. He found it on a scratchy AM station. The former president maintained the most listened to political information program in the United States about what the foreign policy of the United States should be. He made to make it clear we should be the force in the world, we should strive for peace, work together with emerging governments. Yeah, well, that's all well and good. We need to stand up to our enemies. Do you have any idea what this means? Yes, I've had a few years of public service. You should have taken the general's advice and bombed Cuba during your administration and started World War III. 90 million Americans dead in a matter of minutes. Just let me add, if the caller is still there, right here. During the 8 years of the Kennedy administration, we became fully aware that by putting 100% trust in all military advice restricts one to a certain mindset. The generals from the CIA were in favor of the Vietnam action. Vietnam, to address your assertion, was not in the general interest of the United States. And I think it was the feeling in 1965 when we began bringing our forces back. In 1963, I signed NSAM 263, beginning the withdrawal of 1,000 troops from Vietnam. This, of course, was just the first step to total withdrawal in 1965. Even President Nixon said it was a mistake to bring the boys back. He said that at the time, yes, and I won't belabor that point, but I will say that reaching for peace and talking with the Russians led to the final collapse of the Soviet Union and led to terrorism. There are ramifications to every move on the world stage in the post-Cold War era,
and we have to adjust to those realities. But we also must realize that our actions in the long run can lead to terrorism by supplying unwarranted armament to warring parties. Nixon would disagree. I'm sure he would, and we'll have an ample opportunity to discuss the ramifications with President Nixon when he's my guest for all 4 hours on the Thursday. We'll pause now and be back in the next half hour. You're listening to the Kennedy Program on the World News Network.
Patch wrapped the FM switch and sent the channel search flying. He sat back and chugged through the serene Rocky Mountain expanse. The last caller had correctly targeted terrorism. His own briefings showed groups and alliances forged in the post-Cold War era as the real enemies of the United States. Prodigious secrecy surrounded Sector 13's possible military applications, and Meynkewitz's talks with the intelligence people concerning terrorists in Sector 13 frightened everyone. The year 1986 had already brought several terrorist scares and one near disaster. A radical splinter group had almost succeeded in planting anthrax in the greater Pittsburgh water supply. The general public never knew elite forces had killed 5 terrorists at the city's filtration plant. Other incidents included dismantled pipe bombs under cars, pipe explosives on bridges, shootings, and airliners exploding. The nuclear threat, with spent plutonium readily available from rogue reactors and renegade scientists, as well as paramilitary personnel ready to build bombs, had proliferated into a public frenzy. Unless Meinkewitz bothered him again, Patch could forget terrorism and his Sector 13 responsibilities for the next week. He gazed out the open window at the majestic, jagged peaks, scattered with towering evergreens tapering down like silent soldiers guarding the rock-carved canyon. This spaciousness contrasted with the claustrophobic life of Sector 13's underground facility in Colorado. He tried to forget terrorism and his job. Kate would meet him in Golden Gate Park. He planned it perfectly, flying her in from New York. An outdoor scene filled his thoughts. 2 violinists and a noted flutist under the trees overlooking the bay, and a fully catered meal spread across a linen-covered tablecloth. As they dined outside, he would present her with a sparkling diamond secured by one of Meynkewitz's buddies from South Africa. After San Francisco, they would drive east and spend tomorrow night under the towering sequoias in Yosemite. The cellular buzz from his second phone broke the mountain silence. Patch winced at the bulky unlisted mobile phone on the passenger seat. Meinkewitz had promised 3 hours ago not to call him again. But how did he get this number? Patch wanted to let it ring, but reluctantly grabbed the phone from its box and pushed the green button. Ray, what the hell?
How did you know it was me, Patch?
Who else is such a pain in the ass?
Well, that's true.
Patch held the wheel with one hand and rolled his eyes as he neared the mountain crest. Meynkewitz's gravelly voice punctuated the transmission.
How's the scenery up there, Captain?
Ray, leave me alone. I think you have your damn watch set on a timer. Just beeped, and now it's time to bother Kincaid again. The signal weakened.
Timer? That's not a bad idea. Listen up, Patch. You need to get to a land phone.
Ray, this is my unlisted phone. At least I thought it was. I must be 50 miles from a regular phone.
You already passed Truckee and Tahoe, and now you're approaching the Rainbow Bridge near Donner Summit.
I just got off I-80 to get some peace on the old road. I swear you'd track me next time I take a leak.
Well, we can do that.
Patch grinned slightly as he gazed downriver through the slotted concrete bridge. The evergreen slopes above the river spread like an artist's foreground into the magnificent, deep, distant blue mountains. Get lost, Ray.
Patch.
What?
Have a nice day.
The line went silent, and Patch sneered and then smiled at the phone. He shifted up the rock ledge. The bridge and the river formed behind him in the side mirror. Somehow he thought of his dad. His father had died in 1979. They buried him with full honors in Kansas. In many ways, Meinkewitz had become a father figure at Sector 13. As a physicist, he worked with Hollis Leminski and Dr. Alexander Moon, quantizing electrons and electromagnetic fields. Then he expanded his work by teleporting particles through time. His success led to a classified construction of accelerators to move matter back and forth through time. His intelligence credentials landed him the top Sector 13 job in the early 1970s. While his decisions could be reasoned out with the precision of an advanced computer, he always empathized with his people. That empathy allowed him to motivate and steer his subordinates on the proper course. Patch trusted him without question. He looked skyward. "Okay, Uncle Ray, you win." Under the outline of the rock and fir-treed mountains, Patch rolled into a dusty lot housing a dilapidated gas station with dirty dark windows and a long porch. He slowed beyond a set of antiquated red and white pumps and stopped at the next phone booth. A heavy guy in denim farmer's overalls lounged next to a bulky red rusted Coke machine. Patch left the Suburban's door open, engine running, and entered the booth. He quickly dialed Meinkewitz, but the connecting took time. The porch guy's folded hands moved up and down slowly on his oversized stomach. Patch had difficulty seeing beyond the porch's darkened screen door and reflective station windows.
Meinkewitz.
"Great view up here, Ray. Only one thing, I can't enjoy the river. I can't enjoy the mountains. Some pain in the ass keeps annoying me."
You're damn lucky I just don't pull you out of there right now, Patch. There's a ton of stuff coming over the intel.
Patch tilted his head back. "I don't care."
Apparently they're searching New York City for a possible nuclear device.
Meinkewitz had a crammed cigar in his mouth again.
There are reports that other cities are being searched right now. I was afraid for your safety, and with you meeting your fiancé in San Francisco tomorrow.
He actually mentioned San Francisco?
No, only New York.
Tell me you're making this up, Ray. Thank God she's on her way to San Francisco. Meinkewitz talked to his people inside Sector 13's mountain complex, and then strayed from the phone for nearly a minute. The sun sizzled the nape of Patch's neck as his heartbeat soared. He paced around the booth. "Ray, I'm here frying like a desert lizard, waiting for you to tell me if they're blowing up New York." Meinkewitz finished up with the group.
"Patch, it's not an alert or anything. Tom just says it's a precautionary measure."
"You and your precautionary measures. It sounds damn serious to me. I'm heading west. You should have told me all this on the cell phone."
Cell phones can be monitored, Patch. Look how I found your position.
I don't see terrorist groups having the expertise to pull off something like this. "Is that all? Can I go have fun now?" Meinkewitz chuckled.
Thought you ought to know there might be problems in other cities. Patch, you may live for risk, but the rest of us are mere human beings.
"Odds are with us. But if they go on alert or something, call me."
Oh, I wouldn't think of breaking up your little party.
Right. Patch set the phone back on the hook and wished he could relax like the man sleeping on the porch. He stepped into the Suburban, shut the door, and spun back on the highway. As he placed the reflective sunglasses over his eyes, diminishing the glare, he visualized a brilliant orange explosion and mushroom cloud rising over some American metropolis, sucking up the imploded buildings, streets, and people into a huge billowing fireball. Such far-fetched notions rattled his imagination as much as time travel. Walt Whitman Rest Area, New Jersey Turnpike, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Carlos watched his men drag the little bastard O'Hanlon through the mist and around the rest area building. When the highway noise faded, the impact of Carlos's AR-15 into O'Hanlon's skull sounded like a watermelon smashing against the rest area cement. He tossed his gun onto the grass. With the handcuffed O'Hanlon collapsed to his knees, Carlos smashed his fist into his cheeks and jaw. Then he kicked his boot into O'Hanlon's ribs. The Irishman grunted with each successive blow to his body. None of this would have happened if he had given the proper response to simple questions. This coward deserved death. Carlos stood back and felt his neck veins bulge as he screamed. "Tell me what I want to know." In the street lamp shadows, he pointed the rifle's thin barrel at the fallen O'Hanlon's blood-clumped brown hair. Only in his 20s, O'Hanlon possessed potential. but he had been talking to the wrong people. Fresh blood trailed down his unshaven cheeks. "Now tell me, who are you talking to, man?" O'Hanlon looked up slowly. More blood oozed from his mouth, and his puffy, shredded cheeks gave him the look of a beaten fighter. "I was forced." "Forced by who?" The kid could not open his swollen eyes. "You think I am some novice, O'Hanlon? I was with the last dozen of Fidel's men in the Sierra Maestra during the Revolution. Then I spent years in a stinking 200-year-old rat-infested cell in the castle of Havana because that son of a bitch Irishman made peace with Fidel. Now you will tell me what I want to know, Mr. Irishman, and I will protect you." He spoke in a whisper. "They'll kill me." "No, I told you I will protect you. These devices are already on barges and are set to detonate. It will happen whether you tell me or not. You have a choice, my friend. You speak or you die. Now tell me, who do we deal with to break security in New York Harbor and get that device on Manhattan?" O'Hanlon hung his head as Carlos nudged him with the weapon.
"Intelligence in New York. Clay Nabak. He can give the order." Carlos smiled and nodded to his men back in the van. "The Irishman says Clay Nabak."
"You have a big mouth, you son of a bitch." He swung his pistol out a side holster and fired once into the kid's head. O'Hanlon's body flipped onto the grass. Carlos looked down at O'Hanlon's frozen green eyes. "You are too trusting, my friend. Much too trusting." "Just like Plantation Key," said Ian, cigarette positioned in the corner of his mouth. "April 1963, yes.
I did what I had to do then, and I will do what I have to do with Mr. Clay Nabak now."
Carlos left O'Hanlon's motionless body sprawled across the grass.
He returned to the van with the satisfaction of having forced the kid to reveal Nabak's name.
The wiper swabbed in accumulating mist. At the window, he tucked his pistol in the side holster.
"We will call Eric and tell him. Nabak will be forced to get the device to Midtown. Nabak will do what we tell him and tell us what we need to know before Higgins' other devices are detonated."
He opened the side door and squeezed through with his men. The exhaust spewed out as the van circled back and sped out of the rest area. Once on the highway, Carlos swigged the tequila and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "Kennedy is in New York, and he does his radio show from New York. We are heading west to Sector 13. If Kennedy is in any American city, he is a dead man." Carlos raised his knees upward and laughed. Yes, you are right, Santos. Higgins said he could do it, and he has. Higgins is a genius. Our genius." Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, California, July 18th, 1986, 3:06 p.m. Like a fleeting dream before dawn, the park's late afternoon shadows swept the grass surrounded by an amber glow. Patch walked upright in his uncomfortable white tuxedo as if he were in a marching drill. The musical trio tuned up behind the small table's white linen tablecloth, and tuxedo waiters hovered over the steamy metal-covered food containers. Crystalline champagne glasses glistened, and the chilled Dom Perignon bottle laden with water droplets lay nestled in an open white linen wrap. Patch smiled as the extended cream-colored limo rounded the corner and slowed at the curb. Right on time. He thought for a moment about Meínkewitz's dire warning as the driver opened the rear door and helped Kate outside. Her pinned-up hair, dark strands tapering down her bare neck to her flowing yellow dress, intrigued him. The deepening sunlight only enhanced her beauty. The driver escorted her to the table, and Patch gently kissed her forehead. She smiled slowly, her white teeth between her smooth lips, and her green eyes twinkled. He felt her touch as he slipped his fingers around her smaller hand. "You're perfect." This time she smiled without exposing her teeth, and her eyes moistened. "You've outdone yourself, Captain." Patch motioned for Angelo, a man with a thin mustache and a maroon vest, who pulled back Kate's chair. Once seated, Angelo popped the champagne and poured a cascade of pink bubbles into the glasses. Patch lifted his glass skyward. To my lady, a woman who possesses both beauty and intelligence. They clinked the glasses, and the champagne tickled his lips. Patch lowered the glass and removed a green velvet box from his tuxedo pocket. He clicked it open, and a clear-cut diamond reflected the sunlight into crisp, linear colors. They had talked about marriage many times, and she beamed as he gradually placed the ring onto her finger. Will you marry me? She smiled broadly and nodded her head. I'll marry you, Patch. That garden chapel at Chartres is reserved, Kate. Just like we talked about, going to Europe. You have a penchant for planning. She sipped the champagne again. Complaints? None. The music sauntered softly through the warm air. He held her hand, gazing into her eyes, and Meynkewitz's bizarre reports of nuclear devices finally evaporated into the afternoon sky. He kept thinking about what President Kennedy had said the other day about working toward peace. As Angelo and his people served dinner, Patch talked about the wedding and how a few close friends would fly to France. He assured her their busy lives would merge into a gentler pace. She spoke about having children and living in Connecticut. The future beckoned, and Patch, gazing out over the bay waters past Alcatraz to the bridge, savored the thought. There are several houses I want you to see, Patch, along the New York border. We'll still be close to the city, but in the country. I've applied to several schools in the city to teach poli-sci. Well, my discharge will be completed on August 15th, so we'll have more time. He held the bubbly champagne in his hand, but the bubbles again reminded him of the nuclear blasts moving upward. Are you all right, Patch? Patch shook his head. Sure. Like I was saying, my office is right in Midtown, so we might even have lunch on a regular basis. I'll believe that when I see it. You'll be flying, she said, leaning toward him. At least you won't be working in some classified project with a bloated budget. Very funny, he said, playing with her fingers. Money well spent. I remember when I first saw you 3 years ago, in that lobbying conference in D.C. Her teeth glistened. Lobbying? Just a plea for funding. With congressional contacts, Patch, who just happened to control the purse strings. I believe my talk was entitled, The Need for Greater Funding for Scientific Research. And I do believe I made an impression on you, Ms. Landers. No, I saw you before that. You did? You hadn't put on your tie. You were trying to tie it by the windows. You messed it up 3 times and were getting frustrated. Patch laughed as he set down the glass. You never told me you saw that. I was sitting in the lobby with Congressman Folby talking about the bill coming up. I don't even remember what it was. I knew you were speaking because of your picture in the lobby. Something about you, Patch, cursing that tie. I thought it was my speech. And I hate ties. It's just the way you pretended to be drinking later at the dinner. Taking those sips and just acting cool. The waiter poured more champagne as the flutist began a solo. If you drink every time they offer you a drink at those things, well, you made an impression on Kate, the congressman's intern. You were 19 years old, and I was 27. She lifted the glass to her lips and raised it to his glass. I asked you then just what you did. You went on for 10 minutes about flying the F-16s upside down over Chicago. I said to Lana later, who the hell would do that? Your sister probably thought I was nuts, and she's right. That aircraft was kind of aerodynamically unstable. The flight control system, at least I got you to admit you worked in the Special Services Unit for the Air Force. I was enthralled with you, he said, kissing her, and I came back to my people with a commitment for more money. Secret projects. A honeymoon in France, it's like a dream. I've never been to Europe. She leaned back. Burgundy, Alsace, over to Germany. All you have to do is get on that plane. The rest is planned, Dr. Landers. He held up her hand and kissed it. His lips still at her hand, he looked out the corner of his eye at the cellular box as it sounded. He lowered her hand and dragged out the box. Oh no. Oh yes. He set the box on the table and lifted the phone to his ear. Meinkewitz sounded agitated.
Patch, get to a payphone right now.
Ray, take your payphone and stick it up Sector 13. Kate chuckled and put her hand over her mouth.
Patch, this is the real thing. Get to a phone.
What? He glanced at a perplexed Kate, but the transmission had ended. I love you, she said, but her smile fell quickly. What's the matter? I love you too, but I have to get to a phone. You already have a phone contraption. No, I need to get to a land phone for security purposes. Well, all this security will end once you go to work at Norcross. Patch stood and pensively stared into the bay. She raised her brow. Strings, a flute, champagne, and Uncle Ray. Patch feared this nuclear thing had gotten out of hand. Leaving the musician and Angelo's caterers back at the table, Kate took his elbow. The music faded as they walked briskly through the shadows to the limo. He asked the driver to find the nearest phone booth and gawked aimlessly out the window as Kate talked about his last trip back to New York. And you'll be a civilian next month. I hope so. What do you mean you hope so? Nothing. Patch imagined New York sucked up in the nuclear furnace. He had the limo driver stop curbside at the phone in front of a busy deli. He pushed open the door and rushed from the car. Like a running back in a postseason playoff game, Patch dodged several people exiting the deli. Then he reached a wall phone and punched in the number that connected with Meinkewitz directly. Food aromas drifted outside as he waited.
Meinkewitz.
Patch stared at the sun-drenched Coit Tower in the distance and then glanced at the limo. What happened?
Get out of there, Patch. Get in your car. Get the hell out of there. Get back to Sector 13.
What are you saying?
San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. All probable sites for the bombs to go off. We're very worried about this information we have about New York.
This sounds too bizarre. He looked at Kate inside the limo doorway, the sun dancing over her long brown hair. She had no idea they were sitting in the middle of a possible death trap.
Patch.
All right, I'm coming back. I'll be there in 6 hours, Ray.
Make it 5.
He hung up the phone but hesitated for the longest time. Kate climbed out of the limo. Looking for stray phone numbers, Captain? She grabbed his arm and her smile dropped again. What's the matter, Patch? You'd better come with me, Kate. We have to leave. She still had an innocent take on the situation. Leave? We haven't even had dessert yet. Kate started to laugh, but she must have sensed the tension embedded in his face. He guided her back to the limo and ordered the driver to hurry to the hotel. She said nothing as the limo bounced over the hills. When they reached the Spanish tiled hotel on the water, she closed the front privacy panel and leaned toward him. Where are we going, Patch? What the hell's going on here? Patch shook his head. The driver stopped under the long red canopy and quickly opened Patch's door. Still in his white tux, he escorted Kate in her yellow evening dress directly to his red Suburban inside the adjacent parking garage. Patch, this is insane. Are we leaving because of that project you're working on? Meinkewitz just told me about some intelligence they have. They think New York may be blown up by a planted nuclear device. There's a possibility that this city and LA could be targeted. Her mouth opened wide. Our friends are in New York City. He started the Suburban and backed around the garage quickly. I know. Where are we going? Out of here, that's for damn sure. To a safe place. At least for now.
The Kennedy Paradox, Chapter 4.
Sector 13, Hastings Mountain, Colorado. July 19th, 1986, 12:30 a.m. Patch, at least try your cell phone. I can't break the silence, Kate. You've been listening to the radio. If something had happened, we would have heard about it. When they arrived in the early morning hours, Sector 13's upper rock peak produced a craggly silhouette against the starry sky. Kate had not turned from the window for at least an hour. Patch slowed at the lighted chain-link gate deep within the evergreen forest. What is this place? Something classified. Well, I guess that. Patch produced his identification card, and although the guards recognized him, they still called Meinkewitz on the phone. The glowing tunnel ahead, carved out of dense, gray-layered rock, sloped downward and pinpoint halogen lights disappeared underground. It had long been a defense facility within the mountain ridges years ago. On the guard shack's black and white monitor, the animated and disheveled Meinkewitz straightened his thin hair. Guards asked about Kate, and Meinkewitz waved them through. Patch shifted the Suburban along the high barbed wire fence to the lighted tunnel inside the mountain. Kate stared out the mountain as they descended into the next ledge, passing the bright halogens for several minutes. Another checkpoint bordered the underground garage. 2 military guards in white helmets directed them inside. Patch drove the vehicle into an extensive parking area constructed within moisture-laden rocks. "How deep are we?" she asked as both doors closed in unison, echoing off the rocks. "The main tunnel is cut a mile through the inside of the granite. 2 25-ton blast doors shield the complex." Kate held her wrinkled yellow dress above the concrete floor as they passed under the sweeping camera above. "Then you're a part of Defense Command." "Not exactly." A heavy gray door, embedded in thick concrete, rumbled open. The black stencil above alerted visitors to the 10 by 5-inch clearance. Metal rods lined the inner portion. 5 uniformed men approached through the second doors around 30 feet inside. They saluted Patch. "Captain, we have a change of clothes for you both," said the brown-eyed kid who stepped forward. "Thank you, Sergeant," said Patch, taking the army pack. Then he handed a second pack to Kate. They followed the contingent into the corridor. The floor shook as the rear door closed slowly. "You've been ordered to report to UCA, sir." "Understood." Behind the soldiers, they passed through the second door and headed through the silver elevators 100 feet ahead. "What's UCA?" asked Kate. "There's the upper control area and the lower control area," said Patch. "My life is full of acronyms." "Right, and right now, nuts is one of them," she said with a flat affect. "What does that mean?" "Oh." "Sir," said the sergeant, motioning to the white doors adjacent to the elevators. "There are rooms over here where you can change." Patch faced her before they went inside. "The odds are these people will be caught, and you and I will be in Yosemite tomorrow night." "Don't count on it, Captain." As the elevator smoothly traversed the rock tube shaft, Kate's face tightened and her voice inched upward. "Is this research or defense? I can't tell you unless Meinkewitz okays it. If it wasn't for this crisis, they'd never let you within 50 miles of this place." She looked thinner in the camouflage pants and in the Army-issue shirt. "I don't know if that's good or bad. This place can take a 30-megaton hit. 2 25-ton blast doors, like I said, shield the complex." Kate peered into his eyes like a lost lamb and then wrapped her arms around him. She said nothing and nestled her head on his shoulder. He gently placed his fingers on her smooth neck. Golden Gate Park in the sunlight, with the musicians playing, lingered in his thoughts. He stared at the orange digital clock, counting down the time until they had reached UCA. "There'll be no Connecticut, Patch." "Well, we don't know that yet." Her moist green eyes swung toward him. "You thrive on risk, mixed with this crazy kind of optimism. How could you ever do what you do in this place unless you did think like that? Me, I see things as they are." After a long beep, the doors parted slowly. An assortment of noise filtered into the elevator as if they had entered another floor of a busy department store. UCA technicians in light blue shirts and navy pants spoke through headphone microphones. The expansive monitoring area, rock carved out and now surrounded by a concrete dome, originally detected incoming missiles. Technicians formed the missile tracking systems into data and control stations for Sector 13's time displacement and experiments. More consoles located deeper in the mountain actually controlled the power-up containment fields and the embarking chamber itself. A massive United States wall map cast a blue glow over the complex, and a vast array of monitors and remnants from the old days once allowed video conferencing from around the world during a nuclear attack. Across the room, an agitated Meinkewitz held a paper-filled clipboard by his side, pointed a finger at the lanky Dan Harrington from Army Intelligence. When he caught sight of Patch, Meinkewitz grabbed his cigar and marched toward the elevators. He had lost most of his graying hair and had flipped the rest over the bald spot. His red paisley polyester tie hung loosely at the collar as he walked. As he approached, he exposed a thin line of stained teeth as his crisp blue eyes disappeared in the cigar smoke. "Patch," Glad I got you out of there, he said, giving him a bear hug. We just heard a report confirming there is a device planted somewhere in San Francisco. He stepped toward Kate. You must be Kate. You must be Meinkewitz. I'm sorry we couldn't have met under better circumstances. Patch has told me a lot about you. I assure you, this is a serious situation. Think you're lucky stars you weren't in New York. They may not be in New York by tomorrow morning. Who would do something like this? Asked Kate. Patch held his arm. Yeah, who would do something like this, Ray? Meinkewitz removed the cigar from his mouth and held it in his hand as he exhaled. I'm not at liberty to speak openly about this, Kate. Would you excuse us? Patch squeezed her wrist and then followed Meinkewitz along the monitors. Meinkewitz spoke in a lower voice. From what we've been able to gather, a consortium of international terrorists are involved here. The core of this group is an organization called the Funeral House Gang. These people are completely immoral, ruthless, and have a long-standing hatred of the United States. Do they have the means to do this? Meinkewitz dragged Patch away from the consoles as the wavy, dark-haired Dan Harrington in full brown uniform strutted along the monitors. Patch mouthed the words to Kate, slouching at the outside table. I'm sorry. She nodded and looked scared. Dan, you know Captain Kincaid. He shook Patch's hand. Yes, we met briefly in Texas a few years back at the Antique Aircraft Show. No computers aboard a B-26, said Patch. Heard you were getting married, Patch. Well, his wife is here with him. Meinkewitz closed his eyes at the mistake and flashed a quick smile. I'm sorry, his fiancée, Kate. Patch lip smiled as Meinkewitz led him and Harrington to the rear monitors. An array of incoming video from around the country was aligned like displays in a department store electronics department. You're in Army intelligence, Dan. Did they send you out here because of this intel? No, this was just a routine visit. Meinkewitz bit on his cigar as he panned toward Kate. You know, I introduced my wife once, when she was my fiancée, as my wife. Like I just did with you and Kate. Her mother sent me a scathing letter. I burned it. Never told Lynn. Patch smiled. Country's going up in smoke and Meinkewitz is worried about burning his mother-in-law's letter. A military unit on the New York City Monitor assumed positions on the rooftop facing Manhattan skyscraper lights. Well, I hope New York won't go up in smoke, said Meinkewitz. Are they any closer to finding the device? Asked Patch. Harrington's face remained flaccid. Head of internal security for the East Coast, Nabak, was just kidnapped. When they were done with him, they shot Nabak with an automatic weapon. His body was thrown off the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. He had a wife and daughter, said Meinkewitz. Bastards. Patch looked at Kate and thought about their friends sleeping in apartments near Central Park. Across the New York Monitor, more Marines scrambled around the roof while the Long Island soldiers remained calm a distance from the city. What is this funeral house gang demanding? Asked Patch. Let me give you some background, said Harrington. Harrington sat on the edge of the counter and loosened his top shirt button. It's a group of individuals shed by the old Soviet Union and their former allies before the peace initiatives. They are trained as international terrorists. Their motive isn't money or political pressure. Many of the old power groups say they were humiliated by the United States in the post-Cold War and are now demanding retribution. Then you know who's behind this. Harrington nodded. Two specific individuals, Carlos Sánchez and Eric Bonheim. Carlos is the de facto leader. He's been around a long time. He landed in Cuba with Castro in a small force against Batista in the 1950s. After the revolution, as a hired assassin, Carlos actually murdered a high-profile mafia boss and a CIA agent in the early 60s. Carlos is known as El Leopardo, the leopard. Later, when Kennedy made peace with Castro, Carlos did not want peace. He was captured and jailed. We still don't know how he escaped to the Sudan. Bonheim, originally from the old East Germany, is equally as ruthless and elusive as Carlos. They joined forces long ago, but the major factor here is former United States citizen Dr. Stephen Higgins. The bomb maker, said Patch. Higgins disappeared off Miami beginning in March of 1961. It was later learned that he was brought to the Soviets at the height of the Cold War. He sold out. I knew of Higgins, said Meinkewitz. A fair competency in physics. He and Alexander Moon never got along professionally. Moon left Barton College, right? Asked Patch. He did. Shame, because the man is brilliant, but his brain was fried because of that LSD stuff in France. Getting back to Higgins, he's a lefty Marxist from way back. You think Moon is involved in this? No, Patch. I know for a fact Moon is in Geneva, Switzerland. Forget Moon. Patch stepped back from the screen. Gray, how did they even get the devices into the country? Meinkewitz glanced at his clipboard.
Bombs were assembled on a Norwegian freighter offshore. In his East Coast position, NABAC was in charge of stopping this in New York. Somehow, there's a device somewhere in the city. Glad you're not in the middle of that mess. Two men, Harris Tilson and Antonio Cabello, have actually transported the plutonium.
A.K.A. Andre Mousseau, said Harrington. Mousseau supplied arms to the FHG for years, said Meinkewitz. He and Cabello ran guns to Cuba with a guy named Jack LaRue out of Louisiana when Carlos was fighting with Castro from the Sierra Maestra Mountain. The Russians were trying to find out about Zeta 7. Zeta 7 was our classified handle at that time in New Jersey. It's all chaos back in New York. Initially there were reports about barges, but now they're combing the city for an unmarked white cube truck. Bottom line is that detonator may already be set. What about San Francisco and L.A.? Meinkewitz threw the cigar in a metal barrel. Passing comment by two guys on the empty freighter. They mentioned devices arriving in those two cities. Honestly, I think our people are virtually helpless to stop any of this. I don't get it. We have the apparatus and space to intercept anything coming in. This shouldn't have happened. All the MPRs don't matter now because it's an internal threat. Meinkewitz spoke first. While Carlos Sanchez's hatred of the United States goes back to the 50s. As I said, he was fighting alongside Fidel in the Cuban mountains against Batista. He was in prison in that old Spanish castle of the Cabana. He violently disagreed with the peace overtures to Kennedy. They should have got him while they had the chance. Carlos did cut a deal with the Russians. Broke out of jail. Meinkewitz looked back to the monitors. Now he's come back to roost. So just what do we do about him and the rest of this? Asked Patch in a serene voice. There is the possibility of going back in time, should the unthinkable happen. Then maybe you best commence power-up of the chamber, said Patch. Isn't that the original purpose of this project, besides pure scientific research? Menkiewicz's bloodshot eyes watered. You're right on the money, Patch. A few words about the chapters you have just heard. In the 1970s, I watched a documentary series called Connections. In one of the series, James Burke illustrated how easy it would be to put a nuclear bomb in cities, and that's where the genesis of putting nuclear bombs in cities came into this novel. So just picture what it'd be like to be in an American city or aware that American cities were about to be vaporized. Fortunately for Patch and Kate, they end up inside Hastings Mountain in Colorado. For someone who was brought up during JFK's presidency, to fantasize that the president had somehow survived his assassination restores what could have been. Peace, no Vietnam War. I knew young men who were marched to their deaths in that fruitless war. Peace is what Kennedy echoed in his speech at American University on June 10, 1963, 6 months before he was murdered. Patch and Kate are temporarily in a safe place. In next week's podcast, we'll see how Meinkewitz charts a new course to combat the unthinkable destruction occurring around him. Under attack, Menkiewicz's only alternative is to send Patch back in time to warn of the disaster and avert it before the country is destroyed. I'm Robert P. Fitton, about to step into the cockpit of the original de Havilland DH-4 biplane, sweeping into the nighttime sky and back to reality, or what's left of it. Until my return next week, bon voyage. All of my books are available in paperback, Kindle, and audio at www.fittonbooks.com
or you can look at the list of audiobooks separately at pizzazz-pizzazz.com.
All of my books are available in paperback, Kindle, and audio at www.fittonbooks.com, or you can look at the list of audiobooks separately at pizzazz-pizzazz.com.